John, you really have to shut up and listen. The words left my mouth before I had a chance to temper them, and the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. In that moment, I knew the interview had taken a turn I couldn't easily steer back onto a more polite course. I could see the shock in John's eyes, mirrored by the surprise on my coworker's face. It wasn't my proudest moment, but it was honest. More honest than I had intended. Let me take you back to the beginning, where it all started, in the hopes that this story provides some insight into what was, without a doubt, one of the most difficult interviews I've ever conducted. This particular day began like any other in our bustling tech office. The air was filled with the tapping of keyboards and the low hum of conversations about code, deadlines, and the latest tech breakthroughs. I had a series of interviews lined up for a software engineering position, an opportunity that could be life-changing for the right candidate. As the hiring manager, I knew the importance of finding someone not just technically proficient, but also a good cultural fit for the team. We had already combed through countless resumes, and one candidate stood out: John. On paper, he was impressive, a wealth of experience, a solid educational background, and projects that demonstrated his skills and creativity. The first round of interviews had gone exceptionally well, and expectations were high for this final round. We were optimistic that John could be the perfect addition to our team. As the time for John's interview approached, I gathered with my colleagues in the small conference room. The room had a large table surrounded by comfortable chairs, walls adorned with motivational posters, and a whiteboard filled with scribbles from a recent brainstorming session. It was a space designed to foster creativity and collaboration, and I hoped John would feel the same warmth and openness we tried to cultivate. John entered the room with a serious demeanor. He was dressed impeccably, but there was a noticeable tension in his posture. I understood. Tech interviews can be daunting, often more so than they need to be. I've always believed that part of my job is to ease that tension, to help candidates feel comfortable enough to show us their best selves. We started with introductions, exchanging names and roles, trying to set a light and welcoming tone. John nodded politely, but remained reserved, his face a mask of concentration. I brushed off any concerns, attributing it to nerves, or perhaps a deep focus on the task at hand. Then, John opened the conversation with, "Let me tell you a little bit about myself." It was a standard opening line, one we'd heard many times before, and we encouraged him to proceed. I settled in, ready to listen, pen poised to jot down notes on anything that might spark further inquiry. But as John began to speak, I noticed something unusual. His words flowed out in an uninterrupted stream, a detailed monologue about his personal and professional journey. At first, it was engaging, insightful even. He spoke of his upbringing, the early days of his career, and the pivotal moments that led him to this point. It was a narrative woven with ambition and resilience. But as the minutes passed, I realized there was no natural pause, no invitation for dialogue. Around the 3-minute mark, a point where most candidates would naturally pause for questions or feedback, I interjected with a follow-up question, something specific he had mentioned about a project he led. I thought it would demonstrate our interest and keep the conversation dynamic. However, John quickly responded, "I will answer. Just give me a moment," and continued seamlessly with his monologue. This was uncharted territory for us. My coworkers exchanged puzzled glances, a silent agreement to give John the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps he was leading to a profound point, or maybe he just needed a few more minutes to settle his nerves. We all decided to let him continue, hoping for a shift in the dynamic, but 5 more minutes passed, and the monologue showed no signs of slowing. My coworker, taking a different approach, attempted to interject with another question. Again, John acknowledged it with the same phrase, "I will answer. Just give me a moment," and then continued as if the question had never been asked. The room's energy shifted from curiosity to confusion, and from confusion to frustration. We were losing the opportunity to engage, to assess his ability to interact, a crucial part of the role he was vying for. I knew we had to regain control of the interview. Steeling myself, I raised my voice slightly, saying, "Thank you very much for sharing your background. In the interest of time, I'd like to ask if you have any questions for us." This was a standard transition in interviews, a way to gauge a candidate's interest in the company and their ability to prioritize questions. John paused, and I saw my chance. He asked a question about the team, and as I began to answer, he raised a finger mid-sentence and resumed talking about his background, as if my words were merely an inconvenient interruption. I let it go, thinking perhaps he hadn't realized the interruption. But when he asked another question, and my coworker tried to respond, the same pattern repeated. At this point, it felt less like an interview and more like a one-sided conversation where we were merely spectators. I tried again, attempting to steer us back to a balanced dialogue, but John continued to speak over us. My patience, which I prided myself on, was wearing thin. I couldn't help but think of the team, of the collaborative environment we worked so hard to maintain. This wasn't just about technical skills. It was about fitting into a team where listening and dialogue were essential. In that moment, something snapped. Perhaps it was the culmination of frustration, the pressure to make the right hiring decision, or just the sheer exhaustion of trying to conduct an interview that had spiraled out of my control. With a firmness I hadn't planned, I said, "John, you really have to shut up and listen." The words hung in the air, heavier than I intended. John's eyes widened, and my coworker shifted uncomfortably. It was a moment of stark honesty, a break from the polished professionalism I usually maintained. But in that honesty, there was clarity. I continued, needing to explain the gravity of the situation. You walked into this room with a 99% chance of getting the job. Now that chance is 0. The only reason is because, in less than 15 minutes, you've demonstrated that you don't have the capacity to listen at all. So I'm telling you now, you're not getting the job. But if you take anything away from this interview, let it be this. No matter how good you are technically, if you can't listen, you'll never excel in this career. John's face fell, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He apologized, his voice subdued, asking if we could start again. A part of me wanted to relent, to give him another chance, but I knew that the lesson here was crucial, one that he needed to take with him beyond this room. You had your chance, I replied, my tone softening slightly. Best of luck in your future interviews. Make sure you listen. As John left the room, the weight of what had transpired settled over me. I felt a pang of regret, wondering if I had been too harsh, if there was a better way I could have handled the situation. In the days that followed, I reflected on the interview, replaying it in my mind, questioning my approach, my words, my decision. Was I too harsh? Perhaps. But I knew that in our industry, as in many others, the ability to listen is as crucial as any technical skill. It was a hard lesson, and one I hoped John would carry forward, not just in his career, but in his interactions with others. The experience left me with a valuable reminder that behind every interview is a person with their own fears, hopes, and dreams. It's a delicate balance, this role of interviewer, one that requires not just assessment, but empathy, patience, and sometimes difficult honesty. And so, while I still wonder if I could have been kinder, I hold on to the hope that John took something positive from our encounter. That our exchange, as uncomfortable as it was, might serve as a turning point for him, guiding him toward a future where he not only speaks, but listens, where he not only tells his story, but hears others as well. As the door closed behind John, a silence fell over the room, heavy with the echoes of the confrontation that had just unfolded. My coworker and I sat there for a moment, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. We exchanged looks, both of us grappling with the unexpected turn the interview had taken. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling deeply, trying to release the tension that had coiled within me. The room felt different now, quieter, as if holding its breath in the wake of our charged exchange. I could feel the weight of what I'd said pressing on my conscience, the bluntness of my words still ringing in my ears. "Do you think we were too hard on him?" my coworker finally asked, breaking the silence. There was a note of concern in their voice, a mirror to my own worries. I hesitated, searching for the right response. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice reflecting the uncertainty swirling within me. It just felt like he needed to hear it. But maybe there's a better way to teach someone a lesson. My coworker nodded thoughtfully, and we both fell silent again, lost in our own reflections. I knew how crucial listening skills were in our field, how they could define the difference between a successful career and one that falters. Yet, The delivery of that lesson felt harsh, perhaps too sharp for someone who had come in with such promise. I thought back to my own early experiences, the interviews that had shaped my path. I remembered the nerves, the pressure to perform, and the fear of making a mistake. In those moments, small gestures of kindness or understanding had made all the difference. Was it fair to expect perfection under such scrutiny? Had I forgotten the vulnerability that comes with being on the other side of the table? The minutes passed, and I realized I needed to shake off the lingering doubts. There were more candidates to interview, more decisions to make. Yet, as we prepared to move on, the encounter with John remained at the forefront of my mind, a reminder of the human element inherent in our work. The next interview began, this time with a candidate who was more measured, more attuned to the rhythm of dialogue. They listened intently, answering questions thoughtfully and asking their own with genuine curiosity. It was a stark contrast to John's approach, and it served to highlight the importance of balance in communication. But even as the day continued, I couldn't quite let go of the morning's events. I found myself replaying the conversation with John, dissecting every word, every gesture. The memory of his face, crestfallen yet hopeful for a second chance, lingered with me. I wondered where he was now, what he was thinking, and whether our interaction had left a mark on him as it had on me. As the day wound to a close, I resolved to take something from the experience too. I promised myself to approach future interviews with a renewed sense of empathy, to remember that behind every resume is a person with their own story, their own challenges. It was a humbling reminder that while we assess candidates, we are also shaping their experiences, influencing the paths they might take. And so, as I packed up for the day, I felt a quiet sense of determination. I hoped that John would find his way, that he would learn and grow from our encounter, but more than that, I hoped that I too would grow, that I would carry forward the lessons of the day with grace and understanding. Because in the end, every interaction holds the potential for growth, for change, and for the kind of listening that truly matters. As I walked out of the office that day, the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city streets. The bustle of the day's work was fading, replaced by the quieter murmur of evening commuters and the occasional honk of a distant horn. Yet, despite the soothing backdrop, my thoughts were still tangled, caught in the web of the morning's events. The encounter with John had left an indelible mark on my mind, and as much as I tried to focus on anything else, I kept circling back to it. I replayed the interview over and over, like a film loop that refused to end. Each time, I wondered if there was something I could have said differently, a gentler approach I might have taken. In my mind's eye, I saw John's face again, a mix of surprise and disappointment etched into his features. He had come in with what seemed like such promise, the kind of resume that usually signals a sure bet. But beneath the surface, there was a lesson that needed to be imparted, one that I hoped he would carry forward, despite the sting of my delivery. As I reflected, I thought about the nature of communication, how it's not just about speaking, but also about the pauses between words, the moments where listening occurs. I realized that I, too, was learning to listen in a new way, not just to the words, but to the silences, the hesitations, and the unspoken truths that exist in every interaction. The truth was, I had been in John's shoes once. I remembered my own first interviews, the nervous energy that coursed through me, the overwhelming desire to make a good impression. I recalled how easy it was to get caught up in my own narrative, to focus so intently on what I wanted to convey that I lost sight of the exchange itself. As these memories surfaced, I felt a pang of empathy for John. Perhaps, in another time or place, I might have been the one in need of a reminder to pause, to listen, to engage in a genuine dialogue. The thought was humbling, and it softened some of the harshness I had felt towards him earlier. Back at home, I settled into my favorite armchair with a cup of tea, letting the warmth seep into my hands. The room was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. It was a space where I could finally unwind, let go of the day's tensions, and reflect in peace. I considered what my coworker had said, the concern in their eyes echoing my own doubts. We had both felt the strain of the interaction, the awkwardness that had filled the room, but perhaps we had also underestimated the impact of our words, the sharpness that might have cut deeper than intended. I hoped that John would take our exchange as a catalyst for growth. I imagined him sitting down after the interview, processing what had happened, sifting through the feedback to find the actionable insight within. It was my hope that he would recognize the value of listening, not just as a professional skill, but as a fundamental part of human interaction. As the night deepened, I resolved to carry forward the lessons of the day, to approach future interviews with a mindset that balanced assessment with empathy, that recognized the humanity behind each application. I promised myself to remember that every candidate brings their own story, their own vulnerabilities, and that my role was not just to evaluate, but to engage, to listen, to understand. With these thoughts, I felt a sense of peace begin to settle over me. The day had been challenging, but it had also been enlightening, and as I prepared to close my eyes and let sleep take me, I held on to the hope that both John and I would emerge from this experience with a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. In the end, every interview, every interaction is an opportunity for growth, for both the interviewer and the candidate. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that this was just one chapter in an ongoing story, one that would continue to unfold with each new encounter, each new lesson learned. The next morning arrived with a golden hue, sunlight spilling through the window as if to remind me that a new day was a chance to do better, to be better. Yet as I prepared for work, sipping my coffee and letting the aroma fill the kitchen, my mind still lingered on the encounter with John. There was an unexpected heaviness to my thoughts, like a stone resting in my chest. I found myself contemplating the nature of second chances, both given and received. How many times had I been offered the grace to try again, to learn from a misstep? And how often had I extended that same grace to others? On my commute, with the familiar rhythm of the train beneath me, I observed the people around me, faces immersed in screens, eyes lost in thought, each person carrying their own stories and struggles. It struck me how easily we can become wrapped up in our own narratives, forgetting that each interaction is a chance to connect, to understand, and perhaps to offer a kind word that could change someone's day. As I arrived at the office, the usual hustle and bustle greeted me. Papers shuffled, keyboards clattered, and colleagues exchanged morning pleasantries. Yet beneath the surface, I felt a shift within myself, a subtle but significant change in perspective. The previous day's events had left me more attuned to the energy in the room, the unspoken undercurrents of anxiety or excitement that often accompany interviews. My first task of the day was to review the feedback from our most recent round of interviews. I scanned through the comments, noting the strengths and weaknesses of each candidate. When I reached John's name, there was a moment of hesitation, a pause, as I considered how best to document our interaction. The tone of my report needed to be honest yet constructive, a reflection of the dual role I played as both evaluator and mentor. I typed slowly, choosing my words with care. It was important to convey the technical prowess John had demonstrated on paper, while also addressing the communication challenges that had arisen. As I wrote, I was mindful of the balance between honesty and encouragement, hoping to provide feedback that could guide him toward growth rather than discouragement. After finalizing my notes, I took a moment to reflect on the broader implications of my role. Interviews, I realized, are not just about assessing skills. They are about understanding people. Each candidate, regardless of their performance, offers an opportunity to learn something new about the human experience. And each interaction, no matter how challenging, is a chance to practice empathy, to listen deeply, and to respond with kindness. Later that morning, I found myself in a meeting with my team, discussing upcoming projects and deadlines. As we brainstormed ideas and shared insights, I noticed how the conversation ebbed and flowed naturally, each person contributing and listening in turn. It was a dance of dialogue, one that underscored the importance of collaboration and communication in our work. In that moment, I understood more deeply the lesson that John had inadvertently taught me. The value of listening, of truly hearing what others have to say, extends far beyond the confines of a job interview. It is a skill that enriches every aspect of our lives, from personal relationships to professional endeavors. As the meeting drew to a close, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I resolved to carry this lesson forward, to approach each interaction with the intention to listen more and speak less, to engage with curiosity and openness. It was a commitment to growth, not just for myself, but for the teams and individuals I would interact with in the future. By the end of the day, as I packed up to leave the office, I felt a sense of closure regarding the interview with John. The experience had been challenging, yes, but it had also been transformative. It had opened my eyes to the nuances of communication, to the delicate balance between speaking and listening that defines our interactions with others. As I stepped out into the evening air, the city was alive with the sounds of rush hour, the hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant wail of a siren. Yet beneath the noise, there was a quiet understanding within me, a recognition that every day brings new opportunities to learn, to grow, and to connect with those around us. And so, with a heart open to possibility, I made my way home, ready to embrace whatever lessons the next day might bring. Because in the end, it is through our interactions with others that we find the greatest opportunities for growth, for change, and for the kind of listening that truly matters. Another story is coming soon,